President, this bill would designate yogurt as the official state snack.
What exactly are we defining as a snack here?
I think it's self-explanatory. I mean, you have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then you have snacks.
You're listening to Mind the Gap, a podcast about science, skepticism, and trivia, bridging the gap between your minds and everything else. I'm Alyssa Chenery.
I'm Mackie Drew.
And I'm Keegan Gwendolyn.
And our show today is called The Fruits of Knowledge. Each of us today are going to cover a topic related to food production. We're going to start with Mackie.
All right. Well, I'm actually going to do two topics just because I couldn't fill the gap, so to speak, with just the one. And I kind of wanted to touch on both of these. And a big thing for me, a big common topic that I have to debate people with in my everyday life is MSG, monosodium glutamate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's something I use in cooking all the time because it's a great resource for cooking. So what it is it's like salt produces a salty taste, and then sugar produces a sweet taste. Glutamate produces a savory taste, and monosodium glutamate is a produced version of glutamate, a stable, room temperature, crystalline version of glutamate.
And you can buy this widely?
You can buy this at any store. It's called Accent, and there's probably some other versions at grocery stores, Bulk Barn, whatever you want to do. It's pretty widely available, and it's very, very handy. But it's had a long history. It's not like a new thing. It just sort of gained kind of a infamy in the 80s and 90s. So it actually started being used about 100 years ago. The reason it became so popular so quickly was because it was suddenly catering to a taste that had been not ignored, but a little bit neglected in isolation purposes, right? People added tomatoes to things to add the glutamate that the tomato gives, and beef, and that's why we have beef and chicken and everything, right? Because we need a certain amount of savory in a meal to make it delicious. When we were able to find the isolate of savory, it became huge. It does actually have some health risks in that it does contain salt. So if you have high blood pressure, you might have an issue with that. But beyond that, it actually doesn't cause any acute symptoms. It doesn't cause any chronic symptoms. It's no different from what you'd find in a tomato. So it's not going to cause any severe issues unless you have a ton of it, literally. No, that's not a figure of statement. If you have a literal ton, you'll have an issue.
Mackie, I would like you to shovel 1 metric ton of MSG into my mouth, please.
Well, as long as you're paying, I'm totally willing to do that. And you better not back out of it. MSG downfall in public opinion sort of began in 1968 with a paper by Robert Homan Kwok describing a possible causes of something that was referred to as Chinese restaurant syndrome, and which is a non-specific anecdotal set of symptoms that are attributed to American Chinese food preparation. And in this paper, he tries to describe a possible reason for some of these. Some of the symptoms being feeling bloated or tired or having a headache. And some of the things he came up with as a possible reason would be that there's a lot of salt intake, there's a lot of alcohol used in cooking, and people are eating a lot of food in these places. And one of his final items was MSG, and people tended to fixate on this because it was a really easy to. It was the only one that really didn't blame the user, So it sort of simmered for a while, where there was a clutch group of people who despised MSG, and it really hit its stride in the 1980s and 1990s when people started to blame that for plenty of health problems. I've seen it described as a cause for most of the incurables, diabetes, cancer, arthritis, multiple sclerosis. You go on any of the usual conspiracy health food sites, Natural News, InfoWars, things like that. You'll find it implicated in all of these things, including mind control, which I can't even begin to guess how that would work.
If it really did have mind control, that would be awesome. Yeah. You can't think no one would be using that.
Do you think if I ate a ton of MSG that I would gain the power to control others' minds?
I think that's really what they're going for here, right? Like I said, there's no actual bad symptoms here. All it really does is help satiate you. Anything that's savory will help your body realize that, oh, I've probably had a good amount of food. I'm probably good. It's not going to make you feel full. It's going to make you feel satiated, which is going to make you not want to eat anymore, which is actually probably a better condition than feeling full and stopping eating, you know?
Isn't that the same thing? Satisfied?
No, it's actually distinct in that satiation comes from a hormone feedback loop, whereas the fullness is actually stretch receptors in your stomach.
Oh,
So
I
they
see.
both.
So there's two different mechanisms for saying stop eating.
Yeah, at least. Yeah, so this is actually probably a better way to stop eating than feeling your stomach
And your
stretch,
stomach's like,
I'd imagine.
I can't take it.
Yeah, that's not really the best time to stop eating. You should probably stop way before that. The Canadian Foods Inspection Agency verifies the findings of every other investigation by any country or organization that MSG is safe and can be helpful in food preparation. And they even claim that no MSG labeling can be misleading because MSG can actually occur in like natural sources like tomatoes. Like if you say no MSG and you use tomatoes in a meal, you may be lying.
Even when you say no MSG, it kind of makes it sound like it's something bad.
For sure, yeah. It's like the no gluten thing, you know, on beef jerky.
Yeah.
You're like, well, was there going to be anyway?
That kind of brings up a point that I'm somewhat interested in discussing. Like you said, Mackie, they have this like no gluten labeling and no GMO labeling, for instance, that
Right.
they're trying to get past. Like, what do you guys think of labeling things based on this whole consumer demand? Like, oh, we have the right to know, versus, a lot of consumers being largely uneducated on this sort of thing.
I feel like maybe, like, I obviously I'm on the side of science with respect to GMO, and that I think they're for the most part very helpful, and like not there's no ethical problems, there's minor environmental problems, and there's no health reasons or no health risks associated with them. But I can't help but to think that I would prefer more information to less. I know there's constantly there's I suppose an idea permeating through a lot of fields that more information isn't always good. I suppose what I'd like maybe is not the labeling to be directly on the package, but the information available elsewhere should you want it.
I think that the label is purposely to mislead consumers. Like, take a thing of ice cream, right? Let's say you have it in your head that you have a gluten allergy, even though no one has ever told you that, and you've never been to a doctor, you don't have celiac disease or anything. Gluten is perfectly fine for you to eat. So you've never had any education on what gluten is, where it comes from, what kind of foods it would be in. Right? Mm-hmm. So when you go through the ice cream aisle and you see that there's like a no gluten thing on ice cream, it's like, well, gluten's not in any ice cream, right? They're just pandering to you to buy that specific brand of ice cream. And
Right.
You look at the way that other allergies are labeled or other like health problems, they're not. They're all in the ingredient section. Maybe listeners in other countries might not have the same kind of regulatory standards as we do in Canada, where all of the ingredients are always listed, and if you're allergic to something, it will definitely be on that list, because then it will be illegal for the company to sell that product if they don't tell you that, as long as there's a known allergy for that specific item.
But they do label some things. They label no peanuts. They label no lactose.
I think they're doing that because they've caught on to the fact that it's a very popular allergy, right? And normally a person who's like grown up with that kind of allergy would probably skip over, like, let's say the whole granola bar section, because there's no way they're going to find something that certifiably won't have a peanut in the granola bar section. But oh, look, suddenly they're walking by and they see the tag, and they're like, oh, they're making them now. That's cool.
So you're saying you find it acceptable in terms of trope busting, but not in terms of like just general labeling. Like, you'd never expect gluten in beef jerky, so you shouldn't label it because that's just marketing jazz.
Exactly.
I think I tend to agree with you, Alyssa, in terms of like how I would vote should it come up in a vote that I was able to act on. I would definitely say let's not label it with GMO stuff, because it's clearly just lobbying for the sake of marketing, and it's not actually for any freedom of information, anything like that. It's just for the sake of making money in those terms, right?
So what do you think about MSG then?
I think that could be lying, so I think that's probably enough justification on its own, you know what I mean? But I'm going to end this MSG section with an anecdote, which is one Thanksgiving, my mother had not known I'd gotten the MSG. Assuming it was salt, she used it in her recipes for the entire Thanksgiving meal. And we didn't realize this until much later. So we were eating the meal and we were like, this is the best meal we've ever had. What's going on here? Because it does sort of substitute salt a bit. It's a little salty because of the monosodium, right? So you're actually tasting a bit of salt and you're also getting this ridiculously satiating flavor. It's like overwhelmingly delicious.
Sounds so
and
good.
we didn't realize what was going on until later when I saw the MSG was out, and I was like, what were you using the MSG for? I thought you were like super against it. And she was like, oh, that's MSG? And I'm like, oh, this explains everything. I thought that was pretty good indication. Anyway, the second half of my segment was basically halal meat. It's something I see a lot recently, especially being on a university campus. You see that a lot of places. You see it in food courts, in the mall, and grocery stores. And it's likely due to the recent increase in Islamic populations in Canada and the US. And I find that there's a lot of misconceptions about this, including what I thought. For instance, halal is actually not something to just describe meat preparation. It actually refers to anything that operates under Islamic law. So that would be like, you can have a halal life, and you can have halal, pants or whatever, you know what I mean? As long as it follows all the laws of Islam, then it's technically halal. But yeah, looking online to try to find misconceptions, as I often do when I'm looking into a subject, I found a lot of people asking what halal meat was, thinking that it was some sort of health benefit. It was like low on carbs or something, like that there was actually some benefit in terms of the way it was prepared, when really that has nothing to do with. Most times you're talking about halal meat, or halal food, you're talking about the halal meat preparation, which is just a way that they slaughter the animal. A lot of people think that this might be actually immoral, because the kind of ritual slaughter that they go about is actually intended to reduce the suffering of the animal. That's how it's described in the Quran. They say that this is like, you have to slaughter them this way to reduce the amount of pain the animal feels, when in reality it actually seems to be causing them more pain, because what they do is they hang them upside down and they cut the necks all the way back until the spinal cord, and then they leave the spinal cord intact. So they drain the blood that way, and they cut the vocal cords so that they can't hear the animal screaming. The idea is to get the blood out of the animal. And they thought this was the most effective way to kill the animal without hurting it. Of course, now we know better, because we understand what the spinal cord is for.
To be fair, the animal, if the vessels to the brain are cut, probably doesn't remain conscious for very long.
Well, as far as it's been studied, it's found that this is a fairly painful way to go. Obviously not the most painful way to go. But within the spirit, I suppose, of the Quran, you'd want to go with an electrocution method or something to that effect, right? Something that is instant. I think that a lot of people get into the letter a little bit, when they really should be focusing more on the spirit of this particular...
In your opinion.
Yeah, of course. I'm not Islamic or anything. I just feel like that might be something that should be considered, I think, of course. But beyond just the ritual slaughter, halal food also has to not contain any of the following: pork, animals found already dead, so no roadkill, any blood, any intoxicants, that would include caffeine or alcohol, things like that, and basically anything any animal slaughtered in a ritual practice that is not belonging to Islam. So like blessed by a rabbi for, kosher. Kosher is not compatible with halal ever. So, and there is a way around it. If you are going to die without food, and there's only non-halal food around, you're totally allowed to eat halal or non-halal food.
Oh, that's a good loophole.
For sure. That's good thinking ahead. I'd say these rules, that rule in particular, at least, is far better thought out than a lot of those in the Old Testament and New Testament.
This seems to be very practical.
Exactly, yeah. Well, I imagine if a similar rule in the Bible might say, if there's no halal, no Bible-ready food available, you need to kill everyone around you and their whole families. That's all I wanted to say. So, Keegan, you want to pick it up from here?
Yeah, sure. So, another form of food that has a lot of stigma attached to it is processed food. And with recent health trends, more and more people are telling us to stop eating processed foods. You hear about the raw diet. But processed foods are originally called convenience foods, and they're foods that are prepared and sold to be easily and quickly consumed.
So would so anything in a tin can would be, easy to store? Would that count?
Not necessarily, not in the original spirit of it, but
Okay.
I think that has something to do with it, which I'll get to. It includes such factors as a long shelf life, which gives sort of low spoilage. It's quick to prepare, so anything that's instant, all in one as well, so no need to make separate side dishes, like, say, a TV dinner with all those separate compartments. Easy transportability, so that's kind of in line with what you were saying with canned food. Mm-hmm. It's easier to stack a whole bunch of cans than it is to stack a whole bunch of rotisserie chicken. The other major factor with convenience food is that they're often dishes that are complex or difficult to make on your own. For instance, bread. Very few people nowadays bake their own bread because it requires a bread maker.
Or a lot of time.
Yes, a lot of time, and, maybe a certain amount of knowledge. Or processed food has been around for a lot longer than most people think. In fact, it's been around for thousands of years. Ancient versions of food processing included the establishment of bakeries, creameries, and butcheries. All of these represent the processing of raw food to save time, effort, or money of the consumer. The Aztecs also used a processed food, which they made out of a type of dried ground cornmeal called pinole. And this was easy to carry on long travels, and you would sort of just add water to it before you ate it to give it volume and make it easier to eat.
There's a North American version of that.
Is there?
Pemmican by the Aboriginals of, I think, North America, the Ontario-esque area. They took strips of meat and then they would cook it and then grind it up into powder. Then they would add berries and stuff and put it in a stomach or an intestine, and then later they would eat it.
Man, that's like space food.
And another example was chili. Chili was originally sort of in these dried bricks, and then you would add water to it and put it in a pot and heat it up. And again, it was these processed foods were made for the road because they're easily transportable, they keep for a long time without spoiling.
And you can totally just cut out the water, and it's just so much lighter to carry. You can carry tons of it.
But the meat of this whole issue is going back to the fact that people think that processed foods are inherently unhealthy. And most of it is well-founded, and these concerns arise from the methods we use to solve our food problems. And an excellent example is the salting of food, because salt is an ancient method of preservation, and it's based on the fact that the agents of spoilage, which are bacteria and fungi, these are the things that make your food spoil. They can't survive in a highly salty environment. Basically, the salt causes the microbes to become dehydrated and die, and that prevents them from feasting upon your food. The problem is that we eat so much processed food nowadays that our salt consumption is very, very high, and high sodium can cause serious medical conditions like high blood pressure, which can lead to heart failure, heart attack, and several other events. Similar techniques include sugaring, where the food is packed in sugar to provide a equally hostile environment for microbes, but this too causes conditions like obesity and diabetes. So, you've got salt and sugar, which are ancient methods, but modern preservatives have much scarier names, but they may actually be healthier for you than high salt or sugar. For example, potassium hydrogen sulfite. Another example of preservatives that are currently used are the addition of saturated fats to foods. And these are often added not only to improve the stability, but to improve the palatability of the food, which is the texture and the taste. On the other hand, these have been linked to obesity and heart disease. There's definitely a trade-off. Processed foods aren't inherently bad. You just have to watch what they contain, like you do with every other food that you eat. From an environmental perspective, though, the individual packaging that accompanies many processed foods ultimately ends up in a landfill most of the time, which isn't good for the environment. Ultimately, processed foods aren't evil or bad in and of themselves. Each person has to take responsibility for reading the nutrition labels that we have, at least in Canada, and making sure that they aren't going overboard on sugar or salt or fat without realizing it. The real problem here is not that processed foods are bad for you, it's that nobody pays attention to what is in the processed foods. It's really just a case of us being lazy, which I guess is the goal of convenience foods in the first place. But
well, some I wouldn't say necessarily lazy. I would say productive might be the end goal. If you want to be productive somewhere else, food isn't something you necessarily need to want to worry about.
Well, I want to talk about one of those things that is hiding in our processed foods. Or not hiding, it is on the labels. Promise. I want to talk about corn and what we make from it, starting with corn syrup and high fructose corn syrup. Both are essentially liquid sugar, but the difference between the two, as you might imagine, is that the glucose basically sugar in corn syrup, is mostly turned into fructose in high fructose corn syrup. And as you'd imagine, the main use of both is to sweeten food, but they're also used to make a food's texture nicer, to bulk it up, and to stop the sugar that's already in food from crystallizing. High fructose corn syrup specifically has also been mixed in with honey and sold as pure honey, in some cases really illegally, because the two products are almost identical, and high fructose corn syrup is way cheaper than honey. And of course both syrups have largely replaced honey, table sugar, and other sweeteners, just as our food manufacturers' delight in adding sugar has skyrocketed, maybe for reasons of preservation, or maybe because it's delicious, I don't know. And not terribly many people are happy about how much we sweeten our food. Like Kiko was pointing out, there are a lot of problems, and a lot of concern has been directed at high fructose corn syrup in particular. Studies have suggested that it's worse for you than other sources of sugar, contributing more to diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease than others. One particular study at Princeton has found that high fructose corn syrup contributes to more weight gain than other sugars, even when the participants in the study are all eating the same net calories. Those who produce high fructose corn syrup disagree, very predictably. However, some more reputable sources also disagree, like the American Medical Society, stating that high fructose corn syrup acts the same way in your diet as any other sugar. And there's just a lot of controversy that has given it a very bad reputation. Maybe deservingly so, or maybe not. But the industry, to combat this, actually wanted to change the name of high fructose corn syrup to corn sugar. But the FDA said that some people have genetic disorders where they can't properly digest fructose, and thus it has to be in the name of the product.
That's incredible. They can't digest fructose? That seems like it would be extremely limiting.
You couldn't eat any fruits.
Yeah.
It would be awful. I mean...
Well, that sucks. I'm very sorry for them.
Yeah, crazy allergies that we have, like
Yeah.
sunlight and whatnot. That's hard.
Bananas, the most common food sensitivity in Southern Ontario is banana sensitivity.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
above.
crazy.
Yeah,
Bananas are so popular. They're the most
not
popular
al-
fruit
not,
to sell.
not allergy, mind you, but yeah, I know it's like it's the kind of thing I guess you just don't hear about because I guess bananas not as many things as peanuts are and lactose. You know, they're not as integral to life.
That's kind of an important distinction to make as well, is that something like celiac or lactose intolerance, these are not the same as a food allergy, which is something like, a peanut allergy, where they get an anaphylactic reaction and their throat closes and they can't breathe and they have a risk of dying. These are more like they'll cause you some gastrointestinal distress. Celiac can be quite serious, but for the most part, these sort of intolerances are not usually life-threatening.
Also, allergies or sensitivities cannot be created or destroyed. You always have them. They may rear their ugly head when you get older and less tolerant to the problems in your digestive system, but you will always have them from birth until death. And allergies can be acquired and rarely disappear.
I also wanted to talk about how human health isn't the only speculated risk here. High fructose corn syrup is actually having a really poor effect on bees, but very inadvertently. Beekeepers have been giving bees high fructose corn syrup for a few decades. The problem is that it doesn't have the immune-boosting enzymes that the bees would normally get just from the process of collecting pollen. Normally what happens is these enzymes will stick to the bees' legs when they touch flowers and collect all of their pollen, and then when they come back, it falls off of their legs and ends up in their honey. But if bees aren't doing that process and they're just eating the high fructose corn syrup, which again is viable for a beekeeper because it's so much cheaper, they're not getting any of those enzymes.
So these guys are keeping their bees indoors. They're indoor bees, and they give them high fructose corn syrup?
Well, they're not indoor bees necessarily. Say a bee has a source of high fructose corn syrup right available next to their hive. I assume that the bee will naturally gravitate towards that. The enzyme isn't anything that they're particularly attracted to. It's something that they just inadvertently collect by touching the flowers.
You're right. That is so indirect.
Yes.
That's really interesting. It's something you'd never even consider until you find the evidence.
In the 80s, they were testing bees just to make sure that it was viable and that they could handle it. Of course, there's a secondary problem that they didn't really take into account very much then. It's that there's also pesticides in high fructose corn syrup and insecticides, and bees are insects. And even though at the time it seemed like they could handle it, now they're thinking more and more that either the different pesticides and insecticides that we're using are hurting them, or because it's their only, if you're using high fructose corn syrup solely to feed them, that's because they don't have any exposure and their immune system is already tanked because they don't have those enzymes, that it's really affecting them. And they think that it could be contributing to colony collapse disorder, which is where just whole colonies just die for no reason. They're just dead. Although there is probably a lot of other factors into that, and the jury is really out on what's causing it. But it's a very serious issue because we really need bees to pollinate crops, and our whole current system of food production could be in jeopardy if bees are. So
yeah, for sure. You know, I don't want to demonize high fructose corn syrup because it's extremely helpful, and like you said earlier, it may very well be totally fine. And we have such weird conflicting studies from like perfectly reputable organizations completely disagreeing with each other. I don't know how to approach this topic, I suppose. I'm glad you took it on, because every time I look into it, I find myself torn between the black and white, and I guess we really should be more skeptical because of the so much is on the line with the bees, like you were mentioning.
Well, it's an easy fix for the bees. I mean, to at least limit, say, do a 50-50 feeding with high fructose corn syrup, which I understand is cheaper, and then allow them to collect pollen for the rest of it. That's fine. I mean, I think in humans, the things that it's implicated with, diabetes and whatnot, I mean, you can reduce your risk for that without necessarily cutting out all high fructose corn syrup products from your life, you know? Like Keegan was saying,
yeah.
read
That's
the label
fair.
a little bit more closely, and that's, I think, a good balance, at least for now.
All things in moderation. We should do a show on that.
Next week, how about that?
That sounds good. Let's put that in the books.
Okay, fair. What do you want to call it?
How about I don't know, Save the Bees. We'll call it Save the Bees, unless I come up with a better title.
You have until the end of this very podcast.
I wanted to talk about one more animal that we feed corn to, which is cows. Specifically, we feed corn to the animals we use for beef. When they're younger, they eat grass. At least here in Ontario. And in Alberta, cows' last meals consist of barley instead of corn, but they're pretty comparable. There is an argument, from vegetarians especially, that we put more food into producing beef than we get out of beef. I was reading this article from Cornell, and I have a quote here saying that the 7 billion livestock animals in the United States consume 5 times as much grain as is consumed by the entire American population. And the argument is that we would get more food if we instead use the land that we now use to grow corn for livestock to grow vegetables instead, or just corn for our own direct consumption.
But we wouldn't have hamburgers.
I know, it's a problem. Or we would at least have much less hamburgers.
Much less hamburgers? Is that right? Much
Fewer hamburgers.
Much fewer hamburgers?
I don't think much fewer is right. Fewer, much less. I don't know.
Far less hamburgers.
That one's definitely correct. Am I an English major? I forget. They all sound like they're okay to me, personally. I don't know.
This is like the
If you
cutting
wanna
edge
be
of
more
research
picky.
in English.
How do we talk about hamburgers again? I feel like is that like a is that your minor?
Yep. Sentence structure involving hamburgers. Well, ever since the movie McDonald's, we've all just been very confused about how to order when we're sitting there in our cars.
I wish there was a guide to ordering in restaurants. Sometimes I'm so intimidated by new menus. You go to a new burrito place and they're like, "What do you want?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know."
I went to this place. It was my first time. I ordered a burrito. They're like, "Do you want everything on it?" I'm like, "What's everything?" Like, no, it could be dangerous.
That's like the start of like a 12-hour philosophical conversation.
Exactly.
No, it's the old Dalai Lama joke, right? Dalai Lama goes up to a guy on the street selling hot dogs and says, "Make me one with everything."
Right.
So I'm very excited to introduce our new section where we plan on taking a close look at a particular study. So far it's called the study section. You can email me with a better name for it.
I will.
Please.
Okay.
No.
This week I am planning on doing How Descriptive Food Names Bias Sensory Perceptions in Restaurants. This particular study is by Brian Wazink, Coort van Ittensum, and James E. Painter, and it was published in Food Quality and Preference, issue 16 in 2005. And I thought it was fascinating because the researchers set out to evaluate how the name of a dish could change how the diner will respond to that particular food. So they set up camp at a cafeteria at the University of Illinois for 6 weeks, and they picked foods that were offered twice a week, and they spiced up the name of the food. So they changed, for example, red beans with rice to traditional Cajun red beans with rice, and they changed seafood fillet to succulent Italian seafood fillet. They picked 6 foods, and they had it both in its regularly named version and its spiced up version. Oh my gosh, it's a food metaphor. There's the spiced up version. And they rotated the availability of each of the 6 foods throughout the 6 weeks. And 98 people selected one of those foods throughout their study and then filled out the questionnaire. The demographics were interesting. 87% of the people who filled out the study were faculty at the university or worked there, not necessarily professors. 9% were graduate students and 4% were visitors, and no undergraduate students participated in the study, which is unusual for a study.
Yeah. That's usually when you hear about a study, it's usually undergraduate students.
Yes, always. But faculty care very much about the food at their institution, apparently, at least at the University of Illinois. I can appreciate that. The participants were asked to indicate on a scale how much they agreed with certain statements, like, this item tasted good, this item was appealing to the eye. They're also asked to guess at how many calories were in the item, and then they had a basic, like, any more comments put in this section. And what they found is that participants who ate the descriptively named foods were more likely to comment positively about the food, and they also thought that there was more calories in the food than those who ate the regularly named dishes. And to make sure that these differences weren't due to any self-selection bias, which is when people might naturally sort themselves based on just the names, like people who were trying to be more health conscious might have always picked the regularly named food to avoid those mysterious calories that everyone thought the fancy food had. But the researchers didn't find any age, gender, education, or health consciousness preference in either type of name. However, they do see the self-selection is still a problem in their study. It could have intensified the positive effect of the descriptive name. They feel like if you really liked, it would have been different if they'd been giving you food that you may not have liked. They also did consider some other factors that they didn't control for, which you might be upset about, Mackie. They thought maybe the packaging had something to do with it, or if there were other odors and scents in the cafeteria that might have affected someone's initial choice or response to that food. I mean, not all of the foods were available each and every day, so that could have changed. They also didn't have enough data to break down the effect of the descriptive names by any particular food, so they couldn't tell you if it was red beans with rice was more popular or was more affected by the name change than succulent Italian seafood fillet was. So they're saying that it could be desserts or salads or main courses are more affected by that name. We can't really tell from their research.
I'm glad we got into the meat of that study.
The meat of it.
It's not the most solid study, and I think that's why it was good to look at.
That's fine. It's a good thing to test. You know, at least somebody's looking into it.
So, would you like to do the quiz?
For sure.
I'm very excited about this quiz. What I'm going to do is tell you a food, and you're going to tell me where that food is from. The more specific you get, the more points you'll get, although it's not always necessary to name a city. So I want you guys to compete with each other, so I'll have one of you answer first, and we'll alternate. So as an example question, the hamburger is from where? And the answer is Hamburg, Germany.
Okay.
Peking duck, where is that from?
I'm going to get as specific as China.
I'm going to say Ho Chi Minh City, formerly Peking.
Now that is a very interesting answer to me because the answer is Beijing, formerly Peking.
Oh, damn it.
Ooh.
It's a South Mandarin pronunciation.
Ooh.
Both our name Beijing and our old name Peking are based off of the same character.
That means that Keegan got it fully wrong, despite being cocky about it.
Oh, I was.
1 for Mackie, 0 for Keegan. The second question is, the Afghan biscuit is the traditional biscuit of which country?
Afghanistan.
Okay, you're saying that? Because you're going to go first this time, right? We're alternating.
Yeah, I'll say Afghanistan.
I feel like I'm going to just try to make Keegan feel better, and I'm going to try to go Baghdad, because that's the only city I know in Afghanistan. And...
Well, gentlemen, it's actually New Zealand. And as to why it is called the Afghan biscuit, no one knows. It's a very unsatisfying. I had a very unsatisfying search. My third question is, where is cheddar cheese from?
Cheddar cheese. I knew this. Oh my god, I knew this before. I know the whole origin story of why it's orange, but I don't know where it's from. Okay, I've got a guess. I think it's France or Germany, but I'm going to say France.
Do you want to be more specific, or?
No. Wait, cheddar? Is there a cheddar France? There better not be a cheddar France.
Okay, I will say Cheddar, France.
It's a village called Cheddar, and it is in England.
Oh,
Well, I feel like Keegan was close there. Well, he guessed a place called Cheddar, so I'm gonna give him 1. This 4th question is interesting. German chocolate cake was first produced in which country?
America. It was produced in New York by a guy named Mr. German.
I think you're thinking of Black Forest cake, but I'm also going to agree with that. America.
Well, yes. His name was Sam German. You're right. You were supposed to use his Sam German's chocolate bar in making the cake, and it was originally called German's, like, possessive, chocolate cake, but then newspapers just started printing the name without the S, and here we are thinking that it's from Germany. Can't fool you guys. Okay, we're tied for 2. So next question is, where is port wine from?
Port, I'm sure. Portland, Oregon.
Is that your actual answer?
Yes, that's my actual answer.
I'm gonna go with France.
That is a really good guess, but unfortunately for the both of you, it is from Porto in northern Portugal.
That seems really obvious in retrospect.
Next question is, where is the Jerusalem artichoke from?
You know, I'm going to say America.
I'll go with, like, I don't know, Iran. How about that? Iran.
So I'll give you a hint. It is also called the French potato. It's not a potato or an artichoke. It is a sunflower, and it is from generally North America.
So what's that for? That's 4-0, right?
It's 3-2.
3-2 me or 3-2 him?
3-2 you.
Nice. I'll take
Mackie
that.
is in the lead. Next question is, where are sardines from? Where is their original place? Where were they first prepared?
I don't know. Those sound like
Sardinia. I don't know. Sardinia? Is that a place? I don't know.
perhaps Italy. Let's say Italy.
Greece, because why not?
So it is from Sardinia, Italy.
Oh my gosh, I was right. There's a place called Sardinia. This is absurd.
Number 8. Where do we get our slang word for coffee, Java, from?
Grows on the island of Java in in Indonesia, I think.
I think that is so specific. I'm gonna go GTK. GTK? No, GWK.
What are you talking about?
Go with Keegan. I'm gonna go with
Oh no, it is indeed the Java Islands in Indonesia.
Woohoo!
Now, where is the Saskatoon berry from? Last question.
Oh God, this is good. This can't be as simple as Saskatoon. I'm gonna say one of the Canadian territories.
I'll say it's from Saskatchewan.
It is from the city. It grows in Canada, and you might think that it's from Saskatoon, but the city is named after the berry and not vice versa. It grows more southern in Canada than the territories, so I will give it to Keegan. You win either way, Mackie.
Yay! All right.
All right, that is our show. Email your comments and questions to mindthegaphosts@gmail.com. The next show will be called Too Much of Anything, as Mackie has decided. Subscribe to us on YouTube, iTunes, Double Twist, or the podcast feed of your choice. And also be sure to like or rate us depending on your platform. And thanks for listening.
If you don't know just what it is, remember, boys and girls, don't put it